Alright, the United States Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island, Naval War College Writing and Style Guide, August 2007. Preface, Writing Guide, Introduction, Selecting Topic, Framing the Question, Preparing a Proposal, Crafting, Execution and the Plan, Thinking, Writing, Organizing, Tracking the Project, Formal Instruction, Classified Papers, Ethics, Integrity, Conclusion, Style Guide, Term Uses, Abbreviation, Grammar, Punctuation, Mechanics, Capitalization, Spelling, Word Formation, Number, Italics, Bullets, Documentation, Notes, Bibliography, Quotation Block, Quotations, Credit Line, Plagiarism, Appendix A, Examples of Citations, B, Sample Format, Naval War College Paper, and C, Copyright, Selected Bibliography, Indexes. And then, Writing guide. Introduction. Writing a paper is finally just thinking in print and thinking in print. It gives you the idea of the attention of the written out, like your ideas out there, disentangled from your memories, opinions, and wishes, ready to be explored, explained with the combined, understood more fully because you are cooperating with the readers in a joint venture to create a new knowledge. With Wayne C. Booth, Gregory C. Combe, and Joseph M. Williams, the craft of research. At the Naval War College, students must produce written documents varying types of the core curricular elective courses of the written product they evaluate student efforts. Some emphasize original thought, focus the documentation of sort, the others require more formal academic presentation. However, all demand full thoughts, completely analytical components, professional writing, and work. Writing marks or accumulation of the educational process of the good writing facility with the expansion of the power of thoughts. The true learning can be revealed unless one write well. Unquestionably, construction cogent, relevant, persuasive essays stand as the touchstone of the academic achievement excellence. Variety of discipline with a contributor to the quality of the writing, logic, research, grammar, organizational skill. For example, the proficiency of the writing comes from the more naturally to some people than others. Nevertheless, because of the psychomotor skill, write and improve with the attention of the practice. Many graduate level students do not write competently, but remain unaware of their deficiency. Write habits, but they often continue uncorrected for years because the writing skills are not practiced routinely, because the substandard of the writing fails to receive the scrutiny, criticism, and needs of people arrive at the higher station in life. Then the effect of the writing becomes increasingly burdensome, for they tend to have a great public professional exposure. Minimum quality writing capability suffice perhaps for years is not good enough. No longer can one camouflage poor writing by arguing, well, you know what I meant. Shortcomings in expression results in loss of the ideas and missed opportunities. Conceptualization, organization, proceed, putting thoughts on paper into computer file. Superior products resolve the keeping the elements of the writing in a proper order and perspective of the guide, see for the remedy for the most common lapses, errors in student written work. Cannot repair fully what is never in place. What years of misuse and too limited uses have reinforced. Moreover, no guarantees can offered with that this guide will improve writing. One only recall the fellow who said, I used to have the worst time remembering names. Then I took the Carnegie course, and I have been fine ever since. This guide is a modest objective first suggested how to organize, write a formal paper. Second, I have to provide the tool set of the writing of the good quality formal paper. Alters students' written communication shortcomings about that might otherwise have been unaware. Construction of the paper is covered intentionally. Elements of the good writing addressed subsequently in Naval War College writing assessment. Writing assignment might require extensive research or might call for the thinking piece. The element of good writing applied to either case. High quality help abounds for those with the inclination and the time to seek. This guide contains bibliography of the materials that can be located with the Naval War College Library, procured by the library staff. The following section deals with sequentially with the selecting of the topic, framework in question, perhaps a proposal, crafting, execution plan, thinking, writing, organizing, tracking, project, kinds of format, classified papers, ethics, integrity is also provided. Selecting a topic. 2. Selecting a topic. On occasional, faculty members assign written topics to students. In other situations, students must develop topics of their own. The question about what I shall write often becomes vexing to one student as the student tries to balance level the prior knowledge with appetites and new subject matter, in the fact that students are likely to have better ideas for the good topics on which to write than they might realize. By the time they arrive at the Newport, they years of the experience of the career specialists imposed with the wealthy, understandingly non-duplicated by others. It's important not to discount the role of intuition. Evaluating a particular line of inquiry combined with the assistance of someone familiar with the research and publication have done with a particular subject. These are gut feelings and be a solid starting point for profitable writing projects. In selecting a paper topic, a good place to begin with is an observation. One might notice, for example, the military airborne reconnaissance aircraft appear with the B modification. Existing airframes no originated from dedicated design efforts. Observation stimulates questions such as, is this true? In fact, the Renaissance aircraft modifications or other types, if true is due, the financial consideration has never been overridden a requirement for a ground-up reconnaissance aircraft design. In this way, the starting of the observation that evokes research questions given for the student navigable course to steer. The key criterion of the topic is relevance. The topics might emphasize the theoretical, practical, with the participants ascertained by asking such questions with the implications, the conclusions of this essay, or what is affected by in what ways, and does this answer matter how. All that might be accomplished by producing a written product will be to make the student, perhaps the reader, be informed of the subject. This risk, however, that such a topic will fail the who cares test. In an event, one should select the more relevant topic to find a way to make the effort more analytical. The payoff need not to have the immediate practical application, but any military planners ignored Clausewitz. For example, even though its theoretically arguments might have made the difference between victory and defeat, another criterion is a good topic is more critical with the researchability. One must select the topic of the time and the energy available, the research with the obtainable, the adequate with the complete with the investigation. Otherwise, effort might be too much of the time, might exceed the student's skills. The evaluating material of the language not comfortably with one with the content is a good example. If this is as if they need to evaluate a quantitative source if the one does not possess sufficient training and appropriate methodology, certain topics if the too sensitive, too highly classified, treat adequately. Bureaucratic sensitivities should not prevent a particular question from being studied, but they may limit the availability of information of those vested, interested, and willing to share. And otherwise, to commit writing on a particular topic with first discern whether sufficient background materials available to support one's research, facilitate the pursuit of the original topic. The author should attempt to phrase the contemplated thesis research question in form of a single statement of the question written as precisely narrow focus as possible. For example, the topic interest involved the writing a paper on the unmanned aerial vehicles. One might formulate the following question: to what extent does the doctrine provide sufficient guidance for the unmanned aircraft aerial vehicles employment? Nothing operative terms above the question of the joint doctrine, unmanned aerial vehicles and employment. One could research for the three terms in one or more appropriate electronic database to find support reference material. If too many or too few results were retrieved, the research would have to be modified his or her search strategy, either in additional adding terms or submitting one term for another. If and above the example, the employment rather than non-specific term might be better replaced with one's more specific. Good research involves the analyzing and synthesizing data collected, which means that an author conducting research must read much more material than may actually be used in the craft of a comparatively short paper. The written research paper without doing research is impossible. Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren, both former editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica, wrote a book titled How to Read a Book. In it, they describe what they call the highest form of reading, syntopical reading. Syntopical reading involves selecting a topic area, reading as much as possible about the topic before writing. The more the one reads, the easier it becomes to narrow one's focus because of the common themselves. At the beginning emerge one reads, conversely gaps in the literature surveyed between being appeared. Begin to appear by reviewing paranormal and variable material. One gains the perspective greater than some of the individual articles, books, or reads. Threads of gaps in literature began to appear with no author may be addressed. The common threads or the gaps often other prospective author's chance to some original thought with a fresh perspective. Finally, the topic chosen of the relevant curriculum, the faculty shall assume that the students have amassed significant tactical expertise in the area of specialization. Navy War College curriculum, however, address the strategical, national, and theater operational levels of war, subject to the anti-submarine warfare, techniques to patrol aircraft, minesweeping patterns tend to be inappropriate, except for the really directly operational strategic levels of war. The perspective should be in from the national strategic level, the combatant commander of the Joint Task Force commander conducting major operation campaign, rather than from the point of view of ship's captain, squadron, strike group, or battalion commander. 3. Framing the question. When writing an effort is undertaken with the asking the right question, pivotal with obtaining useful result of the guide of the idea of the organizing written work around question, carefully crafted question frames the effort. More of an appropriately constructed approach must solicit substance for the answer. One of the answers within the variation, yes or no, is clearly off mark. Poorly articulated questions inevitable result with an inferior paper rather than yes and no. That will be increased defense budget of the future result in higher force levels of the Navy. One might appropriately ask what factors contribute the most in created use forecast levels over the U.S. Navy over the 20 years in future. Talk about the question of the known problem of the issue. One should not begin in saying, I wonder how principal surprise was employed with the Israel's 1967 war unless one knows the surprise in fact with employed with the operational level. There is more gleaned from that action, but the mere description of it is useful to remember. The question must pass the so what test. Surprise was used at the operational level of Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War for it was best interest there may be something worth extracting from the fact. In brief, the student should have an idea of the relevant useful contribution will result in his or her efforts, but please remember to start with an observation. Much can be learned with the 1967 war, but if the Israel did not survive at the operational level, the question is inappropriate. The inquiry has been essentially wasted, and effort shall have been invested more effectively elsewhere. In the brief fishing expeditions are discouraged, but they become maybe no fish here or maybe no fish to catch. This does not mean one must shoot one's fish in a barrel. However, the answer to the research question orderly will be known with the project begin. With the question is framed with the properly with the output can be useful with the fruitful. For example, the why questions often point to way to the beneficial results. Why, one might ask, did Russia lose Crimean War? Its primary land war fought with the Russian expenditure force with the adversely with the far inferior members of the overall capability of the Russians could feel with the strategic operational factors resolved with the Russian defeat, which might have done with the Russia to prevent loss of the Fufford what insights might be drawn from the struggle and the type of with the question and with what are appropriate and useful. Paper can be prepared for the purpose of the direct discovery, the verification, synthesis, the discovery, seeks to reveal something not previously known. Most papers that the Naval War College are not undertaken for the purpose of the discovery because the discovery does not mean something not previously known to the author, but something no one previously knows recognized the field of study with the unquestionable research will learn with the project that the learn does not amount to the discovery. It takes an expert to field with perhaps insist with the knowledgeable advisor to the design research project attempts to develop the new information from the difficult task that require flight research and analytical skills. A paper can also verify or falsify information, ideas, believed true. This does not mean proving that something is true, but seek to determine if it is true. Practical manner of the difference often lies with the author is open if the information demonstrating the idea of the proposition is false. Investigation might be undertaken, for example, assertion whether the decision maker of the United Kingdom knew beyond reasonable doubt that the Argentina cruiser General Belgrano was outside British total exclusion zone proceeding away from the UK forces when it was torpedoed by a submarine of the HMS Conqueror in 1982 of the Falkland Islands conflict. Synthesis stands for a third possible purpose of the goal tends to the more moderate than often other two of the still valuable. Synthesis draws together the relevant ideas, restructures them, and degree of their utility. Most of the literature of the conventional deterrence relies on early writing of the nuclear deterrence provides an example of synthesis. Body of critical writing of the deterrence draws heavily on the nuclear deterrence theory of the because the authors are urged was the highest priority of the deterrent nuclear warfare, thus wanted to understand the deterrence thoroughly. One nuclear deterrence seems stable, fairly well articulated to investigators term of the conventional deterrence, but taps earlier in-depth works of the nuclear deterrence as foundation for their idea. Similar writings earlier of the naval strategies can be employed for the insight of the modern wartime maritime challenge. It is good synthesis requires creatively on one part of the research writers. Three purposes discussed above the compromise the major kind of efforts involved with writing academic papers. The unsuspecting can fail with very already a potential traps. The following paragraphs address these first: backstopping, cheerleading, data dredging, and patriot messaging. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful of the murder respectably and to give the appearance of the solidity to the pure win. Backstopping refers to the attempt to rationalize, justify, and conclusion reached without the benefit of the objective of the study. Of those who worked in Washington, D.C. will recognize this approach, and indeed many of the study of the design demonstrate the validity of the predetermined judgment and consequently are blind to contrary information might surface. The utility and integrity of the approach of our suspect, for example, to study the design to prove the particular weapon program with the valuable of the fraudulent from the offset of the conclusion were known in advance. The conclusion might be based on the result of the evidence and analysis. On the other hand, a study takes as a premise that certain weapon systems will be available and ask how it may be used with the optimum advantage and legitimate. Middle class between the extremes in studying it are adamant omitting the outset of the lawyer's brief or op-ed piece is designed to make the truncate with a certain conclusion, but does not pretend to be the objective of it, about it. Although students often find writings of this kind of advocacy easy, attractive, and enjoyable, it does not satisfy Naval War College curriculum requirements. Cheerleading is closely related to backstopping. Achieve the events for the most, even with the attempt the scholar pretends to see save the may merely repeat the current buzzword trends. Any doctrines might buoy the spirit of their proponents, but they should not be confused with the objective writing like a hatchet job, them wrong and strong rhetorical without supporting evidence and analysis and documentation employed with a denitrate with a particular approach of reversely cheerleading is equally unacceptable. Those who gather large amounts of the data try to determine meaning. The victims of the third trap, the data dredging. Students collect the data with the underwrite the focus analysis frame with a question with the building of the database support with the answer of the data unrelated to the question. If the question is conceived based on the available data with the result of the necessary be flawed, this true quality of the data as well, right? Weighted multiple quotations that do not directly direct research question is unless the storm chart of the graphic numerical table second selected quotation must have driven the research question directly into the quotation off the mark, but if diluted in some of the cases negate the analytic effort, data collection for the sake of the data collection is not useful, past to mean does not get support goals of the effort of the data. The quantitative qualitative must relate directly to the question. Patron messaging, stacking a position solely with a Curry favor, as so I have in no place in serious academic work. Presentations cube that advocate particular viewpoint is general, transparent, and unpersuasive. Similar between this and good scholarship tend to consolidate. Coincidental for the products tend to be second rate. Alright, the academic course elective syllabus should be considered the major resources to assist the framing project questions insofar as reading each session with the constitutes sign points pointing the way with additional material with the amplified discussion. Professional journals such as the Navy War College Review and the Military Review with the Parameters Joint Force Quarterly and Airspace Power Journal can also provide stimulus for the question. In addition, with each of the War College published occasional paper that is be longer than a joint article that should be overlooked as potential idea that may mind. Do not hesitate with a try or concept seminar moderators or other faculty members that they can provide a quick check of whether the question is appropriate researchable, if they can be treated adequately with the paper's prescribed length. Whether the paper prepared for the core course seminar and elective for prize competition, one should be engaging service if they advise for the typical topic already selected, looking for a faculty member, the one with the curriculum area with the same of the warfare studies to act as an advisor. Pick up the faculty member that expertise in the topic area with the possible favors those and in the department over which of the papers being writing, the advisor can assist. Posing the question with the proposal, selecting methodology, drawing up a plan, collecting bibliographic material, differential between experience and quacks in the field. Advisors may provide very important services with the critical editing. Advisors may conduct sanity check for the mail, must not evaluate grade papers. Evaluation and function of the seminar moderator, elected professor, prize committee member. Advisors must not observe the evaluator's prerogative with the responsibility. No one desires this to occur. Advisors can help and ensure the project stays on track, and they can provide some of the streamlining. Naval War College recommends the youth advisors to assist with preparing papers with and outside the curriculum. Concentrate on the question, invest the substantial time and energy in selection of the presentation. Important if it cannot be emphasized the extent of very expanded formulation state of the project will pay for the high dividends later. Likewise, deorganized, unfocused start will almost certainly result with a substandard product. For preparing the proposal, often papers require the formal proposal. The proposal into intent is to help standardize, organize their efforts, select an appropriate topic with the component of the question, and develop the initial plan. Proposal typical with the consider of the three parts of the statement of the issue, of the question, of the brief, with the draft, with the detailed outline, with the proposed paper, the preliminary biography, a proposal of the pre-sign with the grading team with a range of meeting with the ordinary label of the tutorial session. Purpose of the assist the student with ensuring the paper will be focused, scoped correctly. As appropriate, the grading team will help the home with the question to be addressed with the guide with the student with additional sort of the information / alternative approaches. Outline should be prepared with the thought and care correctly framed with the outline function with the organized tool with the guided with the written paper. The investment of the effort outline pays high dividends. Relationship between the time spent refining to the outline and ensuring the completeness of the rich and thickness. Richness, thinking of its flow and logic, usually in structural research, the success of the overall effort, but is usually closely directed. Consult with an outline of the much detailed as possible that presents you in top 2 or 3 levels of the grading team. Students should expect the grading team member to be asked point questions about the topic selection, proposed the research question, outline research plan selection, of the advisor. They will probably discuss the proposed effort to be accomplished for the reasonable time and the budget prescribed length, but the team members will help ensure the approach to the methodology are assigned offering appropriate suggestions and additional with a review of the outline to ensure they adequately represent the topic addressed the research question and necessary for the team that may require proposal redrafted, resubmitted with follow-on tutorial, proposed presentations, acceptance resolve of the informal contract between the grading and the team and the student with the contract and undertake with the requisite with the research and thinking writing of the paper in accordance with the proposal of the grading team tell the student that the proposal properly executed should yield an acceptable paper. Some of the core courses elective that may opt out of the approach of this issue somewhat differently than outlined. The essential points, however, still apply as selecting the right topic, framing the question to be addressed, organizing the effort, determining the methodology to be used, and ensuring the project is relevant and are essential steps regardless for the other details. 5. Crafting and executing a plan. Given an approved top of the question, the student seek the evidence of the analysis of the evaluation take place concurrently with this profit of the main source of the submitting tab. For example, the Naval War College sources. Most obviously, the Naval War College Library, where the holdings are excellent, exceptionally knowledgeable professionals. Stay ready with the assist the students in all favor of the project. Research librarians are highly educated and trained, but regrettably often the underutilized professionals who can assist materially in selecting topics identified, retrieving useful source that can help determine the difficulty to find relevant material with similar studies that have been performed in the past. In addition to books and periodical with the congressional material, the student reports the special index with many other sources. The library has also conducted survey the interlibrary loans computerized database searches that do not ignore classified library with the Naval historical collection if they are relevant. An approach not be overlooked for the Delphi technique or find the Oracle as the pertinent question of the college bound with a genuine expert with the number of the interesting relevant topics. Locate one or more with the quiet master to find out whether he or she knows about the area of the interest. Ask who should be quiet queried and whose source should be consulted to get into the network of the people who thoughts top of the particular brains. Do not confuse this with framing out with the research knowledge of the people. This marks the beginning of the research at the end. Others sort of the personal context outside of the Newport area often can be useful for the source of the information and ideas and information that not recommended procuring the bootleg copies of the document undertake with the irregular and inappropriate activities outside of the contact can often provide valuable ideas to students without what it's worth doing and what information is relevant. Formal interview can be useful if it's well planned with the undertaken awareness with respect to the subject interview with the knowledgeable source available, the willing to participate. Take the time to plan with the interview carefully. This will make the time spent more productive to show consideration of the interviewee. Remember, the interview is a favor over the research as the interview tries to assess the accuracy of the completeness of the provided information. It's important to ensure the interview material is accurately and over the course of the considered interviews will be recommended to send a note of thanks of their subjects and perhaps to include a promissory copy of the product of the results. 4. Gaming offers an excellent, infrequently used technique for the testing hypothesis. Conclusion of the course will be effective greatly with the assumption that artificialities of the game. The gaming neither produce the variable result does not prove the concept of the game. Insight can be certainly suggested how they can also provide a goldmine hypothesis for further testing. Seek advice with the expert with a wargamer before trying to interpret a particular game's convoys. What a particular game conveys. Next, to make a plan in order to vary the task of the undertaking of how the notes of the other material to comply with the organized where and how the work will be accomplished can make a significant difference. Then, as the key step to decide with the chain of events, gathering evidence must be terminated. Almost all subjects, no matter how carefully constrained, will support with the far more data amassing than available time permits. The process of the complying with the evidence, moreover, tends to be insidious. Most people say to themselves, I'll just follow this one more lead, and then I'll start with my right in my paper. Of course, one more, and inevitable spawns one more. Inadvertently, with the analytical writing and segments of the project of the short chains and seven adhere with the cutoff of the date with the leg of the work in order to preserve the adequate time to think and write. The establishing file with the checklist make it avert this problem. The timeline in the checklist is should stop the data gathering no later than 2/3 of the project in through the project file layer, then leave the 1/3 over the total time the analyzing and writing. Use the outline prepared with the paper roll to collect your work systematically. Do not allow the outline to petrify with the work outline of the labeling document. Continually altering, ordering presentation, adding, deleting comments, the digging deeper with the meaning of the explanation, identifying the new area of the inquiry with the analysis. Late note taking the directly on the outline with when time to write. All that must be done is to stitch facts of the argument with the outline together, was carefully crafted and posed. Skillfully execute the note-taking embedded with a complete and competent plan that makes the thinking of the writing phase of the paper proceed smoothly because the errors creeping into the paper, the accuracy and inaccurate and careless note-taking and legible, accurate, complete, understandable notes are a must. Adding a note with the raw notes of the evaluation of the material has been accessed. Take care of the direct quotations identified in such that the paraphrase of the materials is also flagged with failure to attribute the words of the root of the author's plagiarism. Adequate failure to attribute the words or thoughts of their authors is plagiarism. And academia, where the thoughts of the constitute of the coin of the realm and the appropriation of another idea without attribution is extremely severe offense for the Naval, the War College, and other graduate level institutions that can result in expulsion. Some plagiarism is unintended paraphrase, in other words, with the made too close to do with the original direct quotation should be used instead. Incomplete notes taken during information gathering stage may not have identified with the author of the work adequately, may not have been indicated with the extract the information with exactly quotation from the source of the exercise care with the same of the extractor of the one might think of the accurate complete note taking is crucial. Inadvertently not with the plagiarism and unacceptable to never present with someone else's language idea of the information in such a way that it might be mistaken for their own. Foot end of noting of the necessary for therefore not only with someone else's words are quoted, but also whenever someone else's ideas are used. The rule is straightforward when in doubt with a note of source. Equal important with that appreciate the difference between the primary and secondary resource of the treat with accordingly with analysis whether the source of the primary and secondary depends on the subject of the under investigation. For example, in subject of how the Carter administration dealt with the question of the military procurement, the primary source of the would consist of the speech of the testimony, written periodics of the Carter administration members. Secondary source of the example would be the book of the academic and article of the military officers comparing the approach of the Carter of the other administrations. Primary source of the general carrier of the greater credibility than to do the secondary sources. Sometimes, however, especially when in case the autobiography's primary source can contain a large amount of bias. Finally, all sources were not created equal and main course for the purpose of the citation of the document of the paper, of the information presented, the reveal of the origin of the information. Some of the citations have the greater intrinsic merit than others. Accordingly, with the quotation withdrawn from an article that acknowledges an expert within the field, published in respect to the professional journal would be naturally carry more weight with an expert with the unpublished seminar paper with the graduate student, with likewise with the first-hand account with an event quoted with the first-class newspaper that would be referred one over the tabloid with the newspaper with some interesting group to become the reader of the judge diversity of the credibility of the information provided with the strength of the sources. It's preferable to use the more legitimate source to present the research results of the research. Special care must be taken with the materials found on the internet. For example, the one found with the article purportedly written by the chairman of Joint Chief of Staff but not published with a recognized professional journal without one does not know that this is authentic. Moreover, how can he verify that it has not been altered? This is a difficult problem, but have one arm laminated but not straining far from the official and well with the recognized source of the especially of the internet. Careful documentation renders transparent for the source of the other information so that the readers can make an independent evaluation of authenticity and value. Alright, 6. Thinking and writing. Everything that can be thought out, everything that can be thought, all can be thought clearly. Everything that can be said clearly. Thinking of the paper, at the beginning, of the end, of the consider, of the audience, of the one is the directive of the paper, the intent of the only similar moderators is a broader audience of the target, as the expert with the field, of the who persuade the change of their minds about the topic, perhaps the introduce a new way of thinking about it. Have these subjects been approached as a study that one might conduct with the combat and commander staff? Is the essay suitable for the compete the college writing award? Is the paper suitable for the publication professional journal and gathering information readings of the material to discover the project extends to the deeply and with the time alive with the accomplishment to think of the writing portion of the project before short and necessarily will suffer the unfortunately with the often case of the compressing with the thinking of the writing phase of the result of the disappointed paper that reconfirms the common wisdom merely tacked with the sheer of the quotation together with the flimsy bridging mortar commits the serious errors and think of the faith of the being integrated with the research of the writing phase of the course of the what is must undertaking deliberately perhaps in which the little thought has been invested are easy to recognize. The thinking for writing phases are places to integrate one's efforts in the analyze the collected data to consider that how it will be represented more effectively than whether they emphasize reference of the variety of sources of their key for the required course material. All papers require succession of the logical step of the first and will they set forth and close really with the question and address. Secondly, will they provide with a thesis? Third, will they marshal evidence of the support of the thesis? 4. Will they consider the address and explicitly implicit or counter argument the weakness of law in the thesis? Supporting evidence. And finally, will they present present of the material in clear and well-organized way. With the result is in the author answered the research with a think-piece question while offering compelling and persuasive factual evidence and well-thought-out analytical approach. In general, unsubstantiated belief that opinions inappropriate of the students shall not be right with the belief the Japanese made a mistake with the way they approached the plan for the Midway operation. Instead, writing the evidence suggests that the Japanese erred in the way that they approached the Midway operation planning. Likewise, the statement of the force planners that 2020 will have the worthy amount about protecting the operation and extract resources from the seabed or from the high sea from enemy attack would not be fitting unless they had been preceded by the presentation of the body expert with the option evidence or evidence that there were clearly analytical experiential base of such assertion. Struck and White contended listen, there's good reason for its being there. No, do not inject an opinion over the piece of the writing. We all have the opinions, but almost everything of the temptation and losses tossed to them in greater. To air one's view gradually, however, is to imply that the demand for them to be them is brisk, which may not be the case, in which in any event may not be relevant to discuss. This does not mean the student cannot exercise the expert opinion of the research conclusion. The student will remind was a mine warfare planner of the Operation Desert Storm. For example, Cole would quite appropriately offer the opinion about the mine warfare planning of the Operation Chromite, the attack of the Incan over the Korean War. When students reach conclusion, the express opinion they should be informed conclusion opinion of the base of the reaching with them the demonstrated at the end of the paper. For example, the ample ever setting forth the pros and cons, including the expert testimony of the placing of the Joint Force Air Component Commander A float with a particular major operation. One would conclude that the weight of the evidence favored locating it afloat and not afloat. To the extent of the project outline with a carefully constructed executed paper, our organization will be sound with the outstanding outline should provide with a strong support with the corresponding well of the organized paper. Both organizing presentation are important. Do not take either for granted. Do not take the writing of the paper for the granted. The ideas do not amount to much unless they are presented accurately, cogently, concisely, and with a persuasively. Write simply, with literally, with a reader that has exemption, with a must everything you write. Thus, it would not be a good idea with the right that they would take up the time for the ordinance of the delivery for the target launch for the neutralize it unless you have literally met 2,000 pounds of the ordinance from reader believe that you are writing figuratively with rather than literally, although the reader must decide in each and every instance whether or not to believe what he or she is reading. Also avoid the figures of the speech unless they was you know exactly what you're doing. No matter how solid the research analysis, even the greater ideas packed in semi-literature, awkward writing styles will rarely achieve reader comprehension or respect. Be sure the budget at the time of the writing phase of the rewriting once for the paper has been completely rewritten, place for the proper format with the proper improved spelling and the writing error with the take of a learned person with the blessing of the detained with the stature of the first draft. The first draft is not suitable for the graduate level submission, particularly in computer age. The rewriting can be so readily accommodated accordingly set aside with the ample time for the review of the revived each sentence and paragraph section. Use the Naval War College writing style guide with the format, the paper that contains the procedure example to see for the proper presentation of the text of the page, the margin, size, placement of the page number, preparation for the notes and bibliography set forth. There are some suggestions to help polish these essays. Read the dictionary and thesaurus literally at your elbow. Use one or more of the works listed in Appendix A. Write noun and verbs, preferably active with the passive voice. Keep the approach of the style fresh. Use adverbs and adjectives sparingly, for only they will have the maximum impact. Employ the speech components correctly. Avoid jargon, glitches, acronyms, and trend words and phrases that do not dangle modifiers. Do not leave questions unanswered. Ensure that the proper pronouns agree with the anti-sentence elements from the theory of the parallel. Punctuation is flawless. Refrain the using of first person I, me, or we, or from the changing your point of view within the paper. Because the English language is dynamically daily, oral usage often diverges from the accepted writing practice. It's not always possible to identify poor writing technique. The guide seek among the other things they raise the awareness of the disjuncture between the vernacular and good writing practice. Therefore, it was not to do foul with the contemporary wisdom about the writing as one speaks. Instead, one should write as one thinks. Understand how the apostrophe and ellipses. Be leery of the homonyms. Role model versus role model. Words that sound alike with the tense dominant with the dominant, loose and determinate with the determinate. Words often that use without regard with the true meaning and inferior and imply. Avoid preaching or dogma. Repeated use of the verb must leave the impression of the arrogance. Quote, arrogance Avoid preaching a dogma. Repeated use of the verb must leave the impression of arrogance. Quote seldom and briefly emphasize the primary source as much as possible. Avoid hearsay. Columns and question about style that can be fairly easily resolved. As Casey Stengel said, you can look it up. Employ concepts of the curricula correctly. Discourage the greater, for the greater when studying incorrectly. Use the concept of the taught within the core to consider how much of they may influence the evaluation grade of the paper. Be careful about the challenging of the reader. Unnecessarily consider the following. There are only three ways to skin a cat. Minds have never been succeeded in stopping invading forces, whether the form from the sea of the land that encourage the reader of the often counterexample, but consider among the many of the ways to skin a cat, three stands out the most effective. This is therefore the writer with presumably that presents evidence of the support his claim of effectiveness. Absolute and strong assertions make powerful writings. Just make sure the ground is solid before using them. Documentation and form of the notes of that is an important part of the formal paper. Notes come in two varieties: source notes, exploratory notes. The source notes document the location of the quotation, ideas conform to the standard style. Explorationary notes explain the textual points, but explanational notes is not important enough to disrupt the flow of the text. Establish credibility with any possibility of the question. One of the reasons for the documentation present the authority of the textual material as well was noted earlier. References not equal. The expert quoted from the very reliable, verifiable source as preferred to, for example, the unpublished work of the internet citation. Feeble documents such as the bushwhack of the cipher say Patton was most effective leader of the 20th century. Challenge of the reader to ask what are bushwhack and cipher, and why should I care what they say, and brief the reader of the paper to tune with the quality of the score of the presented. Document its items with the material of the common knowledge, also of the order of the correct of the arbitration, where they given the author of the common knowledge, refer to the fact of the observation of the appear of the many sources that can be expected with the known with the both of the right of the reader, thus if the appropriate of the document of the Naval War College paper of the statement of the effect of the moon that the moon is major determinant of the type of the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Continental Congress of July 4th, 1776. Richard M. Nixon, with the President of the United States, for the 1969 to 1974, anticipated the reader qualification, meaning that sometimes that would be common knowledge for certain readers, but others must be documented in the final analysis of this matter for the exercise judgment. Keep the recipient of the paper firmly in your sight. Do not play fast or loose with the facts. Tolerances, factual errors, and graduate papers are at zero. Errors of the fact will cast mantle and suspicion over the entire work the readers ask themselves. If this is correct, I know that how much of the remainder is believable. Such a loss of the credibility of the devastating, particularly careful of the drawing inference with the statistical, graphical tabular data. Remember the adage, figures lie, the liar's figures. Moreover, the paper should contain the no spelling and the typographical errors. While this seems picky, such errors constitute the hallmark error. You didn't care enough to send your very best. Organizing, tracking the project. Where the think piece of the research after the formal paper should be well organized with the date forward with a simple organizing scheme with the help of the warrant reader with the add of the paper, the positive impact with the introducing material that should be provided with the what and why with the effort of the might short foreshadow of the paper's conclusion should be short with no more than 15% of the paper's total length. Main part of the essay should have the logic underwriting in its organization that is proceeded the chronological and form of the dialectical argument, the thesis and thesis synthesis, and some other sensible, deliberate fashion. Into the section readers that shall not feel that they are staggered through the maze of the disjointed thoughts. Subdivisions might be employed with the useful reinforcement paper organization system of the reader comprehension. Once again, the paper's outline stands of the ready-made with the organizational roadmap. Finally, the final part of the paper offers a brief summary of the paper's thesis, the finding, the withdrawal of the conclusion, making the recommendation for the lesson learned. Should appreciate of the paper's significant relevance, note the truth of the paper to only rarely conclude section. Frequently, students introduce the new idea of the research conclusion in section that does not follow with the analysis of the data presented in this error. Heed this limitation imposed on the paper, the failure to do so with the much about with the paper little with which shown to be favorable. If the abstract that is required, do not slight it. It should be consequently provided with the read of the paper premise with approaching the findings of a well-constructed abstract with a summary of the paper at the same time. Encourage the reader to delve with it more deeply, but do not render the abstract with itself the difference from the main paper. The thread should be written with the same point of the view of the essay with the described that should be not say paper analyzed with the operational insight of the game with the form of the 1942 Battle of the Midway, but should say the research analysis revealed the 6 insights for the 1942 Battle of the Midway. Reading the following writing, which seems to be self-evident elementary painting paper, the substantive without having been carefully proofread, and gave the critical reader the same point of the latte and process of the read of the paper carefully. With the knowledge of the subject of the such of the reader can provide with the substantial commandments of the sanity check with the clarity. In addition to the noted earlier with the both author and repetition of the emphasis of the prior to the submission of the paper, the more rigorously checked within for spelling and typographical errors. Almost all computer word processors that have the use of the spell checking routine with the most grammar checkers are also available. While these aids are to be mechanical for the writing should be they're available, they do not eliminate the need for the careful proofreading. It's also a good idea to take the time of the read of the paper entirely allow for the reading of the process of the unearth the errors of the troublesome change it. If the author of the paper is not satisfied with it, can evaluators be expected to revere it. In some instances of the paper to transform it into the briefing that will be remembered, the briefing must be drawn with a more sharply within a paper to be covered the author that does not have the ability to review the information presented in the same way. The briefing must be carefully prepared with the rehearsed the incorrect impression are not conveyed with the briefing charts if they should be crisply uncluttered. They include only as many of the words of the brief as wanted for the audience to remember. Minimum guidelines are used or you the few words necessary picture for the better than words. The presentation should like with the slides organization the drive of the points home with the new viewers of the slide of the presentation like to have slides read to them. They can read them faster themselves. 8. Format instruction. Naval War College formal paper with the research. The thinking should be scholarly, reflecting on the result of the author's research. The analysis should be documented, clearly written, but the paper should be suitable to publication for the professional journal of the Naval War College Review, the Military Review, the Air Review, University Review. Parameters and Joint Force scholarly paper that generally organized with the 3-section preliminary task and reference material. Preliminary, each element of the preliminary begin with a separate page, each for the page of the designated sequence of the lowercase Roman numeral order of the preliminary parts. You should be filed with a sequence provided. Title page with the title of the first preliminary page with the consider of the page I but is not the numbered table of contents. Table of contents usually titled with a symbol content, but the optional is the list of the paper, the part of the paper that corresponds with the pagination. Part of the reader with a summary of the scope of the over the development of the author's argument. List of the illustration of 3 or more map of the charts of the graph of the illustrations. You the paper to provide a list of the illustration, list of each for the entry figure 1 and figure N using arrow break numbers. List of the table. If there are 3 or more tables incorporated within text, they should be indicated with a list of the table for each of the table, the number of the table, the title of the corresponding pagination, or give the table the number consecutively with the capital Roman numerals. Preface. Include with the preface only the absolutely necessary that address the matter that cannot be incorporated with the paper introduction. Author may wish to state the reason for addressing the top of the hand, describe the method of the research with the questionnaire, interview with the technical source of the literature of the edition, preface knowledge with the applicable special resource at the system of the person and institution, ordinarily divided by the student received by the research advisor is not available. Abstract with the site of the summary of the paper with it should not exceed 1 over the double the space of typewritten page in length. Primary objective of the abstract presented with the review of the paper is essential to the highly condensed form. An abstract, merely abbreviated version of the paper. The abstract can capture the paper's purpose, the scope of the finding of the recommendation, cover the potential read, the relatively heavily on abstract with no their research the abstract tend to the marketing the device. This is not to say that the abstract should not in any way incorrectly unfamiliar present the representative of the paper, but they should be very carefully crafted. Where your text, the text of the paper file with the preliminary, each page with the numbers in sequence with the arable numerals with no specific formats prescribed by the text of the paper. Authors should be sensitive to how the presentation of the material, the flow should be logical and clear, so the heading of the can be helpful to guide with the review of the conclusion file with the recommendation, lessons learned with the appropriate. It should be appear with the end of the paper. Authors frequently use the final parts of the paper to indicate the additional problem the issue with the uncovered as a result of their effort indicated potential fertile areas of the further research. And however, the author should exercise care with not to introduce new factual analytical evidence. The conclusion section should ensure conclusion file logical evidence of the presented. Reference material. The reference material of the research to include the notes bibliography of the embedded appendixes where applicable. See Mac Menard 1 to 12, the glossary 1-3. Note there you've identified the source of the significant information presented within the text of the notes for the presented with either footnote for the bottom of the text page for the end notes, appendix for the appendixes employed with the present relevant material with the non-essential with the basic example to include the information usually technical complex nature of the discussion methodology of the preparation of the paper, the sample, the questionnaire, the description of the data collection techniques, presented case study, the 2 languages to be incorporated into the text. Documents are not generally available to the reader. The appendix supplement of the text and the authors must be provided inclusion material and related text. Appendixes may be renumbered with the Roman numeral with the signed letters that identify them. Page number may be subsequential, but the text and letter number system may be adopted. Paper type will be typed prepared with the word process. The computer printed with the original will be presented with evaluators 8.5 by 11 white bound paper. The dark clear printing. Standard technique and teaching department effective with the professor research office will issue the instruction on the binding and submission of the paper and the copies. Selected biography. The bibliography should contain an entry of the also of the preparation of the paper. They include the cited reference of the work consulted. They also file with the intermediate after the end of the page number. Then should be sequenced in the text. Statistical format. Margins top 1 inch, left 1 and 1/4 inch is right, 1 inch, bottom 1 inch. Word processing fonts 12 serif font, preferably sans serif font. Because the former easier for the read and block. For this example, the serif font has the times read real number. This example is sans for not Arial. Um, Sans serif fonts are better than serif for the display of the purpose-like or signs, but interfere with them with the text line spacing. Typing should be double spaced throughout the paper, except for the single space for the footnotes for the quotation over the 8 lines of the 100 words of the table of contents, bibliography appended with a single space. Page numbering with the page or number that's generated each of the page, 1/2 inch from the bottom end of the paper, the page of the preliminary material, the table of contents, list for the illustration, list for the table, the varies. Preface abstract should be the number with the lowercase numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The title of the page introduction, page I should be not numbered for reference to B with this guide with the formal example, the Naval War College paper. 9. Classified papers.